Dating situation for that young man, having to deal with his own injuries, but also the loss of the woman that he had just married. Can't even imagine. Let's bring in our guests to discuss with us, former law enforcement officer and domestic violence expert Claudia King, and criminal and civil defense attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Let me start with you, Claudia. And first, I want you to speak to, we watched the victims telling their stories, saying the things that are on their heart. How important that is for the process. It wasn't always that way. And there's been such more of a focus on victims over the last few years, 10, 15 years in the criminal justice system. How important it is for the process, for accountability, and for justice.
It's absolutely important, and I'm so glad that we do now have the Victim Rights Act that gives the victims the opportunity to do exactly this. This is, for so many victims, the only point that they will get to have closure and that they will get to say the things that they want and need to say to the perpetrator that took so many things away from these particular victims especially. So I'm so glad that we do have the victim rights that we have now. I think it is an important part of the healing process for many. And if I could have a wish, it would be that more victims would have the opportunity to speak because, sometimes they don't get that chance.
Yeah, I would agree. And sometimes it has to be limited just for timing purposes. And that goes to my next question, Randolph. At the end of the day, this particular case, because of the high-profile nature, and also when you look at the picture of the wedding, there were so many victims. Only about 4 people got hurt, and I say only, I use that term very loosely. Everyone who was at that wedding that day got hurt. The victims, that's the thing that sticks out to me. Just how many victims there were of this particular crime.
Certainly, this was a lot of victims that were family and friends and people that were at that wedding and at that reception that night. And so this is a lot different than, let's say you have a murder incident where maybe you have a mother or father or a child that may come up and speak. In this situation, you've got the husband, the mother, the father, the friends, everybody's there, which I think really has a lot of impact on the judge because he can see exactly how much of a ripple effect this has had on so many people in Sam's life.
Claudia, one thing that can't be discounted is the high-profile nature of this case. Talk to me about if and how that may play a role in the judge's ultimate decision as to what justice is in this case.
Yeah, I think the high-profile nature can actually affect how the judge ends up ruling. And we heard it from the MAD and family spokesperson who said, this is what we expect. And I hope all the judges in South Carolina are hearing this. So I think this was an opportunity for this judge to really, set down that this is not acceptable. And I think the judge knew that there was a lot of people watching, a lot of input, a lot of people that wanted to see justice had in this case. And I think that the sentence was just that.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, still with us to discuss, former law enforcement officer and domestic violence expert Claudia King and criminal and civil defense attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, I'll start with you. And what did you think of the parents' statement?
I don't really think it moves the needle much. It's certainly nice to hear them speak. They did probably a little too much talking about how great Jamie is. I think it maybe would have been more relieving to the family, the victim's family, to maybe hear her admonish their daughter a little bit. The things she's doing now, those are all great, but those don't bring back the victim in this case. And I don't really think, again, it moved the needle for the judge in this situation.
Claudia, let me ask you about the age of the defendant in this case and what role it might play in the judge's thinking in sentencing. She was 27 years old now, 25 at the time. She certainly comes across much younger, and 27 is not young when you talk about making mistakes. But how does that play into this idea that she can be rehabbed, that there's a possibility for her to come out at some point and live a productive life, and like her father said, go out, spread the message, and that in some way could help save other lives?
I absolutely agree with that because, as you said, 25, 27 is not young. She certainly knew what she was doing, But with the sentence and the age that she'll be when she does get out, she will have lots of life left to live. And if she does use that life in helping others, then that's fantastic. And that's really the best thing that we could hope for in this tragedy at all.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with that. And Randolph Rice, you know, a lot of people took issue. We had shown some phone calls between the defendant and her father. They were Zoom calls while she was in jail. They were recorded, made public. And she was feeling a lot of remorse for herself. Didn't seem to have a lot of remorse for the victims. I want to know how you interpreted those. In my estimation, here we're taking a look at some of that video. You know, she's talking to her father. It's the one moment that I think, you know, he's trying to be a dad to her. She's feeling vulnerable, probably one of the few times since this happened she can feel that way. I didn't take it that badly. Would it be something that you as a prosecutor might use in your closing argument? At one point, she says something to the effect of, why did this happen to me? And Dad says, well, that's because bad things happen to good people. A lot of people didn't like that. Would you use that at all in your closing argument?
I certainly would have used it to refute any type of statement she would have made where she would have said, you know, that for somehow that it's different now. But, you know, those are private conversations. And a lot of times when you're having private conversations, your true colors come forward. Your true colors come out, as opposed to what you may say in a courtroom where maybe your lawyer has advised you or you've scripted your statement. So those phone conversations were very telling. You've got to be careful as a prosecutor not to overuse those in situations.
Yeah, fair enough. Quickly, I want to take
DUI, great bodily injury. You're sentenced to the State Department of Corrections for a period of 15 years and $5,100 provided upon the service of 15 years. And on the offense of felony DUI with death, you're sentenced to the State Department of Corrections for a period of 25 years and $10,100 provided upon the service of 25 years. These sentences are concurrent with one another. You'll get credit pursuant to 241340 if that becomes applicable. And I think it is appropriate, and I queried Mr. Finch for a particular reason. It was not random. Our state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, amended 241340 to allow for time spent on monitored house arrest. And it was contemplated that a person get credit when they are basically in jail at home. And based on how Ms. Komoroski's home detention was structured, she was in jail, but for being at home. And I think it is appropriate that she receive credit for any time served on monitored house arrest or home detention. Those terms, in my mind, are interchangeable. From the period of 3/1/2024 through the present, and we will calculate that and place it on her sentencing sheets. Again, these sentences are concurrent. I've ordered the ATU if it is available to her, and she will get credit for any time served pursuant to 241340. Thank you all for your time and your attention today. Have a good afternoon. And I will leave the clearance of the courtroom to security, so I would ask that everyone stay in place and allow Major Bernstead and those who are assisting him. Ma'am, you may want to leave any valuables you have with your family.
All right, so she's talking to her attorneys there as she's walking out. She seemed a bit surprised when the sentence was handed down. On the reckless homicide charge, she got 10 years. On the DUI causing great bodily injury, 15 years. And the DUI causing death, that's felony DUI, that's the one that had the highest amount of time in jail. She got the 25 years, the maximum on all of them, quite frankly, but they're going to run concurrent, so she will do 25. And I will say this, according to Florida law, DUI crimes are not probatable. She will do 25 full years. Let's bring back in my guest, former law enforcement officer and domestic violence expert Claudia King, and criminal and civil defense attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice to discuss. Claudia, I'll start with you. Your reaction to the sentence?
I think it's completely fair. I think she was definitely surprised by it. It was clear by her reaction that she did believe her dad and her high-priced attorneys that she was not going to get that much. But I think the sentence was entirely fair. She took a life. She caused irreparable damage to the other 3 victims of the crash. And then, as Randolph said earlier, there are so many other victims that were part of her life. So I think the sentence is fair. And I just hope that she does do the things that she said she was going to do in her statement, and she makes the best of this terrible situation.
Yeah, agreed. And I misspoke. I said from the Florida law. I meant on the South Carolina law. So please excuse me for that. Randolph Rice, your reaction?
Well, if you notice the previous clip where the judge is listening to her allocution, and in fact, the judge was just doing that, listening, that's always a bad sign when you're standing there next to your client and the judge is not engaging with your client as she's allocuting to the court. So clearly the train was coming down the track for her. I do think that the defense team believed by her taking this plea that she may get something less than that 25, and that may have shown by her surprised reaction, or somewhat of a surprised reaction, when the judge ultimately handed it down. I think it's a little high. I think she should have gotten a little bit of credit for taking a plea versus going to trial and, like you said earlier, dragging this out into a drawn-out guilty plea.
And I think on some level, Claudia, she did get some credit, at least for a couple of the charges. I think the vehicular homicide and the DUI causing death could have merged together. She certainly could have run the DUIs causing great bodily injury, concurrent. So I think there was some consideration there. But also, as we heard early on during Kelly's report, and from some of the family members, people in the community, they take this very seriously. And this was not a crime to be scoffed at.
It absolutely is not. And hopefully other people in the area and across the country take notice that this is not a joke. As you mentioned earlier, this case had very high visibility across the country, and the judge knows that. You know, she sees social media, she sees the news and the newspaper and whatever else. So I think she knew that she needed to do right by the victims and to show everyone that this is serious and we can't joke about this. There's too many people out there drinking and driving. It often does not end in this type of situation, but when it does, so many lives are affected and lost, and we have to take it more seriously.
And I agree. And Randolph, I think that's why the high-profile nature of this case was important in the ultimate decision-making of the judge. Because, again, with so many eyes on this, now this was something that sort of, it resonated throughout, not only nationally, but throughout the world. I think that had a role because people are looking at this case and they're looking to this judge and this courtroom to see just how serious this crime is. And I will say this, and I want to get your thoughts. I thought her statement was appropriate under the circumstances, and it felt heartfelt, even though it was read.
Yeah, first, her allocution, I'd give it a B. I think it was a little bit canned by turning around and reading from the paper to the family. That's when you need to drop the paper and speak from your heart. The point Claudia makes, I do agree. You hope that this has a chilling effect on other individuals. Every time I go to court with a client who's charged with DUI that doesn't result in injuries, the judge always says, think about what this could have been or what this could have meant to you or somebody else had you caused a death in this situation. So it's certainly on the mind of individuals out there. I don't know how much of effect it has on the general public.
All right, fair enough. Lee Komoroski will spend the next 25 years in prison. Claudia King, Randolph Rice, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Folks,